on custom live streaming service, it says.
Right.
Mine says the same. Where are the, here the church, here's the steeple. Where are the people?
Ah,
Come on, people.
They will come.
yes.
If you stream it, they will come.
That's right. That's right.
So we were just talking about a little bit about the snow this week. Paul, did you get to do any walks or anything out in the whiteness?
I did walk a couple of times just to run some errands in our neighborhood. And what was, you were mentioning sledding. We over right at the bank of Tom Lee Park from the Overlook walkway, a lot of folks were sledding, especially late in the afternoon when kids were out of their virtual school. We saw cardboard sleds. We saw real sleds. We saw someone even brought a kayak and sledded down.
Yeah. Oh. Oh, that is fabulous. Oh.
So the kayak tracks we still see they're about to go away, but anyway.
Yeah.
You see the classic Southern
Yeah.
laundry basket? Because that's an adaptation we did when our kids were little. Just
Classic Southern what?
the laundry basket.
Laundry basket.
Oh yeah.
And in college, it was the fiberglass cafeteria trays. Those things.
Yes, yes.
They
Yeah,
will move.
those will slide.
But you got to get the old ones that are real fiberglass, not the plastic ones, not the real fiberglass are just like so slick.
We actually have a real sled from Michigan from a few years back, given to us by grandparents. And it had more fun this week than it has had.
Yeah.
Oh,
We had
that
an old one too. We didn't. We lent it to our neighbors across the street, and the girls used it.
Nice.
That's when it gets really packed and icy. Those are what. That's the machine for that one.
Yep.
Oh, this makes me
I ran into a light pole a long time ago on one of those, going very fast. I wasn't seriously injured, but I could have.
good.
Mimsy, were you a sledder?
Oh yes, I
Yeah.
lived in St. Louis for a lot of mine, and Knoxville got very cold too. But did you all have on your sleds? You could guide them from the front with if you lay down.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Sure.
yeah. That's what I remember. Is just
Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh yeah.
Oh, I loved it. This is all making me very nostalgic.
We also had tractor inner tubes that we would go over to my grandmother's, and there was this one tree that had a bush out to the side of it that would make this wonderful ramp when it snowed and in Northwest Arkansas. And so we'd make a path going with the inner tubes, take a few times, but once it got really packed in, it was great because you'd fly off, but then the inner tube would actually spring you off too. So
Oh my gosh.
we didn't do flips or anything, but you know.
Well, I think that's a perfect entree into our topic for this morning, which is actually paying attention to our natural surroundings and what they may be telling us about our lives, about ourselves, about God, about why we're here and what we're doing while we're here. So welcome to Sunday Morning Forum. I'm Heidi Rupke. I'm the Lenten Preaching Series Coordinator at Calvary. And I have with me the Venerable Mimsy Jones and Reverend Paul McLean and Reverend Scott Walters. And we're here this morning to discuss some of Margaret Renkl's writings in the New York Times. And she has written a book, but this morning we're reading some shorter opinion pieces that she has contributed there. And we have invited anyone who wanted to read ahead with us and also wants to take part in the conversation to type your questions or comments into the chat box or the comment section so that those can be relayed to us, and maybe we can have a little bit of a discussion with you folks at home as well. Margaret Renkl will be coming on Wednesday, or coming virtually on Wednesday, to do a noon preaching, and then in an interview format, I'll be talking with her on Wednesday evening about just a few more topics. that are close to her heart as a writer and as a person. So welcome everyone, and welcome to our illustrious panel this morning. I have a few questions for us, and we're going to start with the article called 3 Billion Canaries in a Coal Mine. Again, that's an allusion to a canary going down into a mine, and if the canary died, then the miners knew it was time to get out because the mine was full of poisonous gas. And Margaret Renkl talks about the fact that we have lost 3 billion birds since 1970. And so she asked the question, what does it mean for us that the birds are dying? So any ideas on that?
Well, if we're the canaries in the coal mine, it means we're not far behind. I'm so struck about this panel taking place in Lent and at a church. My husband used to say, when I would talk about homeless, he'd say, what does that have to do with the church? And I would tell him about the gospel and so forth. But this, Frank, but today I was thinking about him, as I often do, but I thought this would be an example for me to say, look at the book of Genesis, where the birds were created before the people. And as part of the preparation for people to come and be created for the earth, to be a welcoming place with birds and animals and fish and trees. And if they go first, it's a big warning signal, I think.
Yeah. Speaking of Genesis, I'll confess that I didn't do my homework until last night after the sermon was written, but you wouldn't know it because there's a lot. We're reading Noah, the covenant with Noah.
Oh, that's right.
In Genesis today. And so what's really struck me about it was that's the first covenant God made. And it is not just with humans.
Yes.
It's with all living creatures. Both the image of the ark containing creatures, but also the covenant where the bow gets laid down in the sky is not just with humans. It's similar, I think, we forget that in Jonah, there was this sense of tragedy that actually how many animals, well, one, that you had the cows with the sackcloth and the ashes, which was kind of awesome. But then also at the end, God saying to Jonah, why can't you be sad? Why can't you have compassion on Nineveh, where there are all these people and also their animals?
Yeah, that's the last line.
Yeah, the last line of the animals. So it's like they're actually, in the Judeo-Christian worldview, worthy of our care and lamenting their demise, even on their own terms, not just as what they tell us about us. So both can be true.
Yeah, I agree with that. I think, if you look at Genesis 2, one of the first mandates for humanity is that we are to care for creation. We're to care for the animals. It's one of the few, I think, direct mandates God gives us of what we are to do, what our purpose is here. And I think we're right. The birds are a sign that endangerment to us and other species, but the birds in and of themselves are beloved creatures. A conversation yesterday I had with the parishioner was, she said one of the delights of the snow this week was she saw a cardinal, and the red cardinal against the white snowy background. She said that just made my week. It was just one of the greatest joys I've experienced recently, and just looking out at nature in Memphis. And it was just phenomenal, the connection she felt to that cardinal.
I think the birds are definitely something that is beautiful and worthy in its own right. And like you said, Mimsy, we're dependent on them. So then what does that mean our role is if we're starting to notice that there's destruction happening around us?
Well, I think she deals with that in all of her other articles too.
All right, sure. Do you think that is, well, maybe that's the next question formally then. She writes, in the case against doing nothing, so what do we do? Despair, far more than unrealistic hope, is the great danger we face today. Do you agree or disagree with parts or all of that sentiment? Despair, far more than unrealistic hope, is the great danger we face today.
I'd say, oh,
Yeah,
sorry.
Mimsy. No, go, Mimsy.
Well, I don't want to lead off every one of these, but that instantly reminded me of that wonderful story that Lauren Isley tells about the star thrower, the boy who was on a beach. There had been a storm and lots of starfish had been washed up and they were all going to die. And this child was throwing starfish back into the ocean. And this older man walked along and he said, "What are you doing, kid? What, they're all going to wash right back on the shore. And what does it matter anyway?" And the boy thought for a minute and looked at him and had a starfish in his hand. And he said, "Well, it matters to this one." And he threw it back. And that story just says it all for me. We just need to have more conversations like this and do something. Not just, she has a great list in that article, if everybody's read that, about things we can do.
I think there's also a piece at the beginning of that article that I was struck by a lot, which might have to do with where our feelings of despair or hope come, like going upstream a little bit. She kind of pokes a little fun at most of us. Yeah, you drive a Prius. Yeah, you do the things, and it's a bit of a club.
Yeah.
And I think that's actually a really interesting conversation with regard to, in a couple of ways. One, I think as Christians, we have to be worried about self-righteousness. I mean, Jesus is really worried about that. He's really worried that I can have a way of seeing my own goodness, like defining my own goodness by my actions and having that set me apart from, and it is like this big a step to go to my left-leaning friends into that. At the same time, I was thinking of James Allison from last year, who talks about the way our desires, we learn from other people. Mimetic desire, he calls it, going back to Girard. So the truth is both and. I also learn what to love and what to want from other people. And holding those two in tension, I think, is really tricky and important. To really realize I have this tendency to turn what I do for whatever it is into self-righteousness and into something that defines me as a good person. And the ecological point that she makes is true. We're not going to fix it that way. My little efforts, if I place them into the bigger picture, need to be a way of kind of, I think, as a Christian, reforming my spirit, my soul, my desires, more than thinking I'm on the right side of history.
Yeah.
Right, it's an orientation.
That's excellent.
It's a pointing.
Yeah.
Rather than a blanket solution.
Yeah. I think holding those in tension, which she doesn't go right there, but she has some of those elements in the article, are one way that I'd start talking about what it means for us to respond as Christians and what we should be worried about and how we should think about the work itself.
Mm-hmm.
And one line she has in there is despair is paralyzing, and that struck me if we enter the realm of despair, thinking that even our little actions mean nothing in the big scheme of thing, we stop doing anything, and it can obviously it doesn't contribute to the cause, but it also just destroys our souls. We at our clergy retreat a couple of weeks ago, we were talking a little bit with a specialist about clergy self-care, and she said, the importance of just doing a little something, taking one little step, is so powerful. And most self-help, but just healing and pastoral care, other groups, learning to just take one baby step toward what might be a solution or a positive outcome. It's just amazing the benefit that gives your soul. And obviously, if everyone does that, I think it could really make a difference.
I do too. The sentence that also got me was, "But shaming people for trying to do something good is just mean." I think it works both ways, don't you all? I mean, anyone listening knows how polarized politically I am, and what I have to work so hard about is not acting self-righteous about, oh well, if you knew what I know, you'd agree with me. But I myself, and I'll bet everybody listening, has been in a sense shamed about, I mean, I have a hybrid car and people go, oh God, you know, that's what good is that going to do? That's why I think about the star thrower and organic products and things. Everything you do, people can make fun of, really. But discussions like this and articles like Margaret Renkl, I can hardly wait to hear what she will say Wednesday, noon and night. Just give me, just gives me a kind of a good perspective. Just do it anyway, and don't shame others.
Yeah.
You don't drive a hybrid. Why don't you?
Yeah, it can go all the ways. This also brought up another little thing, goofy thing for me, is that Mac and I were talking, Mac Clayton, who works with the Hospitality Hub and does outreach stuff with us. And he was recommending this show. Maybe I shouldn't recommend it. It's called #BlackAF because it really got at his experiences as a Black person. And I gave him my book, Stuff White People Like. And he tells me it's still on his on his counter at home. And it's this book where this guy just is relentless at just making fun of a specific white person who, drives maybe a Subaru and listens to NPR and wears New Balance shoes and likes fixed gear bicycles and goes right down the list. And the subtitle is like the unique taste of millions.
Yeah, exactly.
Yes. It was like, this is the kind of thing, oh man, I've got this vibe going here and it's really not that interesting. And I just did another, I'm like, I'm a cliche, you called out. And so that's in there too, like not taking oneself so seriously, that can also maybe help with the self-righteousness that's always nipping at my heels, at least.
So we've talked about self-righteousness and Mimsy alluded to a political divide here. And sometimes it can feel like environmental conservation falls into one political camp more than the other.
Yes,
it would naturally, I mean, it clearly affects everybody who is on Earth will be equally affected. Where do you think there are places for political cooperation in this endeavor of doing something that doesn't make you seem like a self-righteous liberal or a tone-deaf conservative or whatever categories we have already laid out in our stereotypes of each other?
I'll jump in again, but I'll be quiet. A really dear, good, one of our best friends in Arkansas is the director of the Nature Conservancy in Arkansas.
Oh.
And his name's Scott. He's not the NPR radio guy, since I know everybody listening to this is an Episcopalian who listens to NPR. Anyway, but Scott, it's quite interesting. So the Nature Conservancy works across party lines in big ways. And they are actually down in the stream beds and, getting data. They are restoring, physically buying areas so they can restore different habitats that they see as crucial. They are doing the science. And it's really interesting to talk to Scott, even though he would go to the legislature and make appeals for different, actions. He completely worked across party lines. Once you actually got down into the details, away from the posturing, right? Mm-hmm. Away from the posturing of, I'm going to do this thing and have this opinion on whatever it is, recycling, because that makes me a good person. Once again, that can really keep us from doing the work. Once you were down doing the work, doing the restoration that actually had to happen, he found just a lot of folks. And sometimes it's going to be a duck hunting club that has watched wetlands go away. And so that's where our we can be captive. Like, are you willing, if you're on the left, to say that NRA member and I have something in common.
Yay.
We need to go, let's fix that. That's hard to do in the present climate, but it's there, and some people are doing it.
I think it's entering what you're saying too, Scott. I think is entering the conversation with the same spirit of humility we were talking about earlier. Is if I go back to my hometown, rural Lawrence County, Mississippi, where people love deer hunting, love nature, love getting out four-wheeling, love the Pearl River. If I were to go to Joe Walt's barbecue and ask someone, say, you know, scientists say climate change is the real deal, and why are you a climate denier? I'd be kicked out of the barbecue shop before I knew what had happened. But if I approached it, you know, you spend a lot more time in nature than I do, and I wonder what you're seeing out there, and wonder what you think might be some concrete things we can do to make people can enjoy that Pearl River a little longer, so our grandkids can experience it, so your grandkids can hunt and fish, and mine too. What do you think we could do? And you noticed a lot more than I do. If I approach the conversation that way, so it's a different. We may get to the same place, but we get to it in a spirit of humility, and I may learn something.
And you get to eat your barbecue too.
That's right. Very important.
Yes.
I'm going to move it into the next article because I really loved this story, the flower that came back from the dead. And there was a flower, a species of coneflower that was native to Tennessee. Margaret lives in Nashville. That was thought to be gone and then was found again how many years later? Several decades later, for sure. And one sentence that I highlighted was, each one reminds us that recovery is sometimes possible, even for a species to be lost forever. And so here we are in the season of Lent, and it seems like maybe Lent never stopped since last year. What do these flowers tell us about the feeling and the actual experience of resurrection?
Well, I'll say something. I'm always ready to say something, whether it's right or wrong. I don't think it's a coincidence that Easter happens in the spring. That's not a coincidence.
For the Northern Hemisphere.
For the Northern Hemisphere. I do think, which is where Christianity took hold and then colonized from there in a way. So I want to say both and. I want to say both. There's something in these images of new life that Jesus taught. The kernel has to go into the ground and die before it can come back to life. And I also think the resurrection is something fundamentally different. Both that these metaphors matter, but also that in Christian theological terms, the resurrection, there was this deep disruption in the sinful cycles that have started since time, right? That keep on through me, that relate to this topic. Like, this is where the humility comes in. I'm actually part of what's broken in the world. And when I go back to the resurrection theologically, it's actually not just another instance of new life coming out of what's been. It's this moment when we can say, actually, the cycle stopped once, and we need to present ourselves to that if we want to be changed. Our own impulses towards selfishness and destruction and all of those things. So I want to say both and, right? I want to say, yes, this is beautiful to take these images of a resurrection, that life can come out of death, and it happens all the time in the world, and also say, I also need to remember this theological point that this deep disruption is what is at the center of my faith. It's different.
I think too, it says in her story about the flower that was extinct, the coneflower that was extinct, and it came back to life. And she mentions all the different groups that were involved in this, that partnered in helping make that happen. And obviously nature, God had a huge role. But it's again a both and. It's God's role and our role, that we are a part of resurrection, and we're a part of helping bring it about. And and as we were pointing out earlier, it's not just resurrection of human beings; it's resurrection of all creation. The renewal of all creation is what we celebrate at Easter, as well as resurrection and new life. It's just not just new life of human beings. Um, yeah, but it's just it was really powerful. It's interesting how she referred to some of these species as Lazarus species that come back to life. Uh, but a combination of nature and human persistence and diligence and common purpose toward that.
Well, I I think that the other component we all acknowledge, but it's difficult, is the death part, because without the death, how would there be a resurrection? It's not easy to say or to experience. But I think about, this is kind of wacky, but this black-legged ferret who has, did you all read about him? This little animal was cloned from a ferret who had died 30 years ago. And in some way, through science, they were able to clone through the remains of the other ferret at 30 years later. This adorable baby has come to be. I don't think that has much to do with death. That has to do with urging resurrection. But I think that's why we always say Good Friday. Without Good Friday, Easter is quite different. Again, I don't want to be self-righteous and say if you don't have Good Friday, you can't have Easter. But I just think that's the part that upset the disciples when Jesus said, I have to die before new life will begin with me. So,
and maybe a way to bring that into this conversation is Jesus didn't say, go create death.
true.
But he said it won't come. But what he actually did was enter fully the human experience of not just bodily decay, but vulnerability to others. And so maybe this is a way, I think it is really relevant in actually aligning ourselves and bringing in ourselves and realizing we are entering this as people dependent upon this, because even God could do it in Jesus, in dependent on the physical, natural world. That's what incarnation was all about. And there were politics in it as well, but there was also a body that allowed him to enter that. That's a way too to look like this death that we're partaking in. We're bound up in it. It's not a call to go make it so there can be a resurrection, but it's a call to not pretend like we can avoid it.
Not to create death wantonly, as we
Exactly. Well, that's true too.
I think for me, this story caught the emotion of wonder when I've had a few times in my life when I felt like all was lost at a certain moment, and it felt like it was lost permanently. And then to have that restored unexpectedly is just this expansive wonder that that loss was not permanent, and that death is kind of the biggest loss that we know, or extinction, and that even that is not the ultimate power that is at work here. Is a big and a spiritual thing in my life.
Absolutely.
I'm going to move into the fourth article here so that we have a little bit of time to chat with our guests at home. The fourth article is called Now We Know How Quickly Our Trashed Planet Can Heal. And this piece, Margaret is writing during the first few months of the coronavirus pandemic. And one thing she wrote here was, the coronavirus will not reverse the ravages of climate change, and it will not interrupt our progression toward an even more desperate future. But it is allowing us to see with our own eyes how ready the natural world stands to reclaim the planet we have trashed, how eagerly and swiftly it will rebound if we give it a chance. You may remember that carbon emission levels fell drastically early on in the pandemic, and Margaret writes about several animals that were kind of making their way back into urban areas, and how rivers cleared up very quickly. We could see differences in the natural world. So I have just a couple of questions here. Actually, I'm just going to do one. What have you, Mimsy, Paul, Scott, noticed or given your attention to in new ways during this year of pandemic? Perhaps in the natural world, perhaps something not necessarily related to that, but what we give our attention to is has probably changed this year. Where have you given your attention differently this year?
Besides Zoom?
Besides an intimate knowledge of the workings of Zoom.
I think I've noticed my eyes. Well, many of you know I got a big black eye as part of my COVID experience. So it isn't referring to that, but I did have a cataract removed early in the COVID pandemic, and perhaps it's the new eye. Perhaps it's being alone at home with a lot of windows. I noticed Margaret Renkl has said she has a house with a lot of windows. I do too. I also live practically in a forest, right off a busy street, and I have looked and noticed the shape of the trees and the birds feeding outside, and I have seen more in these past weeks, particularly during the snow, than I think I ever saw before. It's been a wonderful. I expect I'll never look again in the same way, particularly after I have the second cataract.
You hope.
But
Yeah,
it's just been. I'm looking around at it right now. It's just. It has all the things we've been talking about too, and it makes me ever more conscious of protecting what, as Paul said, what we're asked to take care of, which is what's outside of us.
Yeah,
that can include people too.
I've been so dependent on Overton Forest during this time. We're privileged enough to live a half a mile from there, and my morning quiet includes a jog through the park and into the forest there. And I think relevant to this conversation, it reminds me of the need for alive places that we have, whether we live in a city or in the country. And it can seem precious to say that as a city dweller, to say we've got this little plot of forest, but I actually think it's something we're going to have to do. We have to have access to living places, lush places, green places within cities, because the bigger picture ecologically is not that we all go out into the country and breathe the fresh air. We will probably vastly expand our carbon footprints if we all go do that. The bigger things that happen is, I knew an architect who built the perfect house, and he realized that he would have cut his carbon footprint 60% more if he just moved to London, because it would change all of his patterns. So I'm really mindful of the need for these living, vibrant places, and that we can do it within human communities and within cities, where we can walk more and do some of the things that we're going to have to wean ourselves from our cars. We have to do it. Mm-hmm. And so sometimes what looks like the brand of being ecologically aware, when we dig down, I realize I haven't actually moved the needle personally. So that's been really important for me to realize wild spaces within urban spaces.
It's an important one.
one of the joys during the pandemic for us is Ruthie planted what she called a victory garden on Good Friday, and got permission from our landlord to plant a couple, 2 or 3 raised bed gardens in a vacant lot next to our building downtown. And I was amazed at the amount of produce that came from those gardens. I mean, squash, all tomatoes, all sorts of vegetables that we enjoyed throughout the spring and summer. And it was just phenomenal. But when we would go out there, Ruthie would take some bird seed and feed the birds, and they became there was it looked like one particular robin that kept coming back that got fatter and fatter, and that just became a part of our experience, and how that robin would chirp when we were out of bird seed, and just the simpatico we felt with that little plot of land, and the harmony there, and the bounty of the produce that we were given as a gift. It was just phenomenal. Yeah, but that was a great thing. Another thing I picked up, maybe a non-nature thing but related, is I've had 3 20-something guys come into my life just for some vocational discernment, spiritual direction. And I've been working with my 18-year-old nephew on college applications and spending a lot more time talking to him. And it's gotten me to thinking more generationally about, what are we leaving for the next generation? How are we supporting that? Thinking about not only mentoring, but tangibly, what are we what are we giving, and are we being destructive? What can we do to nurture that next generation?
Are we being good ancestors?
Yeah. Well, I can speak to that more than you two youngsters.
No, just a little bit.
I know, just
way off into the future, we're basically the same age.
That's true.
Right?
That's true. Right. We're soulmates anyway, whatever. Yeah. I have a friend yesterday who texted me, and I hadn't heard from her in a while, and she said, well, I've become a slug. And then I wrote down, she said, I watch birds eat as if it's a TV drama.
Worst things to do.
That's true. Yes, indeed.
Like TV drama.
Paul, do you have any questions that have come in?
Yes, we have one question. When it comes to the environment, do we have inalienable rights or inalienable responsibilities? What do y'all think?
Oh boy.
With one comes the other, I think.
Right.
I mean, if you go to Genesis and it says we have control of all of, dominion over the birds and the beasts and so forth. But I think, don't you all agree? With that comes enormous responsibility if you think you have inalienable rights.
We're caretakers.
Yeah.
I think that really cracks open to the political divide, and maybe it's helpful. I think generally about half of us think I'm a container of individual rights. Don't tell me what to do with them. One side says those are mostly economical. Don't tell me what to do with my economic rights. Leave that alone. The other side says my personal rights. And I actually think that language on both sides is problematic as a Christian. Mm-hmm. I don't think there's much in the scriptures that say, whatever the arena is, it's going to get better if you just attend to what you need and attend to defending yourself. And so the language in that question, I think, is very insightful, that I don't think that either of those things, whether it's an economy or racial rights or individual reproductive, or whatever the things are that we are entering the political fray with.
Wearing a mask.
If we're generally seeing it as something that you don't tell me what I get to do, which is kind of an American thing. I think the Judeo-Christian approach undercuts that at it's your neighbor. What does this do for my neighbor? You may come to the same position, but I think it's important how we talk about it. And I'm concerned about individual rights as the ultimate form that these discussions take.
I think maybe the question removes the person from the equation when we are part of the creation. We are all connected to the food chain and the photosynthesis, and we are not outside of it.
Yeah.
And I think in Genesis, am I my brother's keeper? Am I my sister's keeper? Yes.
Right.
You are. That's a matter of fact.
That's right. That's right. So I'm voting responsibilities more than rights. I want us to more senses of connection, more sense that I actually need to give this back to the earth from which I sprang. I need to give this back to this neighbor. I need to attend to these others outside my own.
But how does one talk to someone who asks a question about why do I have to, without, we don't want to shame other people, at least I don't. And so I like the way Paul talked about talking to the NRA people who were not our enemies. They just believe differently. I have a book from a friend in Maine, and it's her son, one of her many sons, who tells a story. He's a great naturalist. He teaches at Bowdoin College, and has written a wonderful book. And in the book, he says his grandfather took all of his. He was the fifth of five brothers, and took him when they were 18. Took them to his farm in Connecticut, and he gave the other boys a shotgun because they were a lot older than Nat, who wrote this book. And Nat said, when I went, it was my turn. I don't know whether my grandfather knew me or he had a change of mind, but instead of a double barrel shotgun, he gave me a double barrel pair of binoculars. And I have never, I don't think he ever put them down. He's just a wonderful person. I wish Margaret Renkl knew him, but I love that story. I think we all need more binoculars, but we don't want to shame people. That's my.
Yeah, I agree with that. I don't think the answer is coming back and saying you people who are talking about individual bad people, but I do think it could inform the way we as Christians talk about things and just the language we use. And if we are continually speaking in terms that seems like we are defending ourselves on our own, I think that's part of the destructive system that the earth is suffering from. We've been under this illusion that if I just do what's best for me and don't look out too far, it'll all be okay. Adam, the invisible hand thing. And I think it's not okay. And so I think cracking out of my own self-interest is first order work. First order spiritual work.
Paul, do you have one more quick question for
I do. The word environment implies we are separate from the universe. Can you talk about how our faith helps us see that we are all part of God's big reality?
Ooh, that's a good one.
Okay, I'll ask the stupid question. How does environment, how does that word translate? What is he or she?
What's around us rather than including us, maybe.
Yeah.
You guys pause very long, and I'm just going to start talking again. So
etymologies to the fore. Yes.
I mean, I do think it's there scripturally. As I said, whether it's in Noah or what, of course, the story is told from the human perspective, but from the beginning, there is this, I know we come down a lot in Genesis 3 on dominion and in the early creation stories that we're supposed to be in charge of things, which does make it sound like the universe kind of wraps itself around us. But the first creation story, things are created, male and female is not even created, but all reality is coming into being, and we came in at the end. And everything was declared good before we got here.
Yes.
good. Tov miod, very good, forcefully good, deeply good, which should break down this idea that once humans got here and were able to enjoy it, things got good.
No.
Creation stopped on day 5. Good. So, I mean, I think that's one resource. There are probably other ways of talking about it, but from the get-go, it wasn't, we're embedded. We're not other than.
Right. That's
I think
what
the Ash Wednesday, from dust you are and to dust you shall return. Our literal bodies will compost and feed the next iteration of life. That's biology, but I think it's also faith.
Adam is Adama. It's
Earth.
Soil. Human is humus.
So is, yes.
Well, thank you, all of you who joined us at home, and thank you, Margaret Jones, Venerable Mimsy Jones, Paul and Scott this morning for joining us. Want to remind you that Margaret Renkl will be here on Wednesday, well, in virtual form, a sermon on Wednesday at noon and a conversation Wednesday evening at 6:30. And next week, we will be covering a speaker, Jamar Tisby. He's president of the Witness, a Black Christian collective. And Paul will be leading that conversation. And so if you would like to read ahead and join along in the conversation, contact Paul McLean for that reading. We'll be starting Jamar's latest book, How to Fight Racism, together. So it's a practical, I have read it myself, and it's not hard to get into. It's a very easy jumping off point of good discussion and good ideas. So thank you again to the panel and to those of you who joined us at home, and we hope to see you on Wednesday.
Thanks, Heidi.
Thank you, Heidi.
Thank you, Heidi.